Let's cultivate our motivation. It's very helpful when you're in a bad mood or upset about something to do the taking and giving meditation. And even if you see that it's your own mind spinning around, creating the problem, still do the taking and giving meditation. And think of all the other sentient beings whose minds are spinning around, creating problems, but who are totally unaware that it's their afflictions. And think of the people who are very unhappy, not because of external situations, but because of the way they look at the situations, the stories they tell themselves. And so with compassion, think that you take on all that misery and then give them your happiness in the form of your body, possessions, and merit. And that's very effective for rebalancing your mind, bringing it to a more neutral state, and simply it's very helpful to accept our own situation and really think about others with compassion. Then motivated by compassion to generate bodhicitta. So we were saying last time that Dharma, if we start the paragraph before that, Dharmakirti says, because objects of comprehension are two, reliable cognizers are two. So objects of comprehension are divided into specifically characterized phenomena, which are impermanent phenomena, which are, according to this system, which are objects suitable to appear explicitly to direct perceivers, and generally characterized phenomena or permanent phenomena, which are objects that must appear to thought consciousnesses. And so we were talking last night about how radical of a statement the Prasangika is, saying that you can have a direct perceiver of a permanent phenomena. It doesn't have to be just an impermanent one. Okay, so other Indian groups proposed additional sources of reliable cognition. One of these is knowledge gained by context. For instance, if you go into your garage and find that your car is not in there, you can know that your car is outside the garage. Unless somebody stole it and it got wrecked. So you don't really know for sure it's outside your garage, but you can make a good guess. Another proposed source of knowledge is analogy, example, or comparison. So this is the new knowledge that you gain when you hear the description of something you had not known about, and then you understand that thing based on the similarity with something you already know about. So that's the way we learn a lot of things. Yeah, what is this thing? Oh, well, it's like that, but it's different in such and such a way. Okay. The Buddhists deny that these two are separate sources of reliable cognition, and would probably classify both of them as types of inference. Yeah, they usually do. A third proposed source of reliable cognition found amongst Hindu schools is verbal authority. So this is mainly textual authority, though it may extend to spoken authority. So this is also found amongst the Buddhists. When this text is authentic, the Buddhist calls such an appeal to the word of scriptures a correctly assuming consciousness because it is induced by a mere term and does not realize its objects. Now that's very interesting. This is the first time I've seen it written that they call it a correctly assuming consciousness, because they usually say, when they talk about scriptural, authority, they talk about it as scriptural inference. Okay, and inference, of course, is a reliable cognizer, not a correct assumer. And as you can remember from when we've talked about this before, I've always shared my puzzle about this, that it doesn't make sense to call scriptural authority inference because we don't know for sure. Yeah. So this is very nice here, and see if you can find it in, he calls it an assuming consciousness there. Oh, okay. Yeah, but it's interesting because in most of the other texts that I'm familiar with, when they talk about the three kinds of inference, it's factual inference, inference by analogy or example, and scriptural inference. Yeah. So I've always wondered about that. So did you check it in Mind and Tibetan Buddhism? Oh, he does. Mm-hmm.
You really have to read the book. It's over my head a little bit, but really sometimes they clarify things in a way that seems like it's what it's saying here, kind of like correcting, refining it. But I'm confused a lot of times, and it doesn't elucidate enough that I can understand it.
Okay, because this makes much more sense to me. Yeah, because if you have scriptural authority, even if you use all the criteria that we have for judging if it's a reliable scripture, even if we use all of that, it seems to me that you can still have a mind that doesn't realize the object. Yeah, maybe you've reached the conclusion that the scripture is reliable because of certain things, which I'm not even convinced that all of those prove it infallibly that scripture is reliable. But even if you realize that, then realizing the meaning that the scripture is saying is a whole other ballgame. Yeah? Okay. So as the Buddhists describe it, the only sources of valid cognition or reliable cognition are the two types of reliable consciousnesses. Only consciousnesses know things. Okay. But they also talk about reliable people and reliable scriptures and reliable consciousnesses, but it's only the consciousnesses that are the actual reliable cognizers. Okay? So just because, even so, of course, the Buddhists rely on scripture too. However, even reading a definitive teaching by the Buddha himself is not a reliable cognizant until readers realize it on their own. Yeah, so that's what I was just saying, because until you understand it, there's no reliable cognition. Just because the Buddha said something straight and I can repeat it just as he said it, does not mean that I know it. Okay, our smart mouth again. It means only that I know the words of it. Of course, within Buddhist thought, there is nothing the Buddha understood that we too cannot come to understand, since Buddhists believe that the Buddha was formerly an ordinary being wandering the round of rebirth just like us. Okay. And then, okay, at least here, it says, in fact, one purpose of Buddhist reasoning is to establish the Buddha as a valid teacher who has extinguished all faults and gained all good qualities. This is essential so that his sayings may be taken as reliably established. Even so, his words are not to be accepted on faith. Monks and scholars should well analyze my words, like gold to be tested through melting, cutting, and polishing, and then adopt them, but not for the sake of showing me respect. Yeah?
If scripture wouldn't be a correct inference, then how could we ever have anything more than a correct assumption about that the Buddha is omniscient?
Yeah. I think, the usual argument that His Holiness uses, and it's from Dharmakirti, is that the nature of the mind is clarity and cognizance. So that means the mind itself has the ability to know everything, and if it doesn't know everything, it's because there's some kind of obscurations. And so then if you're able to remove the obscurations, then the mind is capable of knowing everything. And then to show that it's capable of removing the obscurations, then Nagarjuna went into that whole argument about if things are dependent arising, then they're empty, and if things are empty, then you can generate the wisdom realizing that emptiness that will remove the defilements. And so if you have that wisdom, then you have true paths. The true paths bring the true cessation. So that's the Dharma jewel. Yeah, the Sangha are the ones who have recognized at least part of it. That's the Sangha jewel. The Buddha has recognized all of it, realized all of it. So that's the Buddha jewel. And so then you would use that kind of argument to show that the Buddha is omniscient. So that's the argument that they use. Yeah. Now, whether we have a correct assumer when we understand the argument or an actual inference, yeah, that's another ball game. Okay, but that's the kind of reasoning that is used. Yeah. And when you think about it, it makes sense. But it all depends on how you define mind. Yeah, and similarly, the argument proving rebirth, is very logical, very reasonable. But it depends on accepting the existence of consciousness, of mind. And I remember talking to Tenjimba about this one time, because we were saying how scientists, you can present these arguments to scientists and they just look at you like, what are you talking about? And the basic thing is they don't accept the existence of consciousness. Consciousness meaning how we define it. Now, how do you prove to somebody the existence of consciousness? Just consciousness, whether it's in the body or out of the body. How do you prove consciousness? Because it seems to me, that you can use reasons, but it's going to have to be some kind of experiential thing of somebody looking inside and saying, oh, there's something about me that functions different than my body. Okay. But for some people who are not used to looking inside, or then that could be a really challenging thing. And they say, consciousness is, this whole thing, it's coming out of the body. It's what was it? Emergent property of the body. Yeah. But if you ask them to prove that, then the argument they give, at least what one scientist gave to me, is that, just as we see evolution from one-celled, organisms to more complex organisms, then if evolution just keeps going, then the more complex organism, which is all the time developing physically, then it just develops consciousness. And that's kind of the natural progression of evolution. But if you ask them, well, how does consciousness come out of the body? How is the body going to be a substantial cause for the mind? That's where they get really stuck. Okay. But it's interesting, because all these reasonings, they depend on certain knowledge, or at least certain assumption beforehand. Okay, on the other hand, like he was saying, I think we read it last time, we can't just go through life saying you can't really know anything. I can't really know anything. It's all, that thing about, well, the world isn't really round, it's really flat. And, how can we know anything? And at some point we have to kind of make assumptions. But on the other hand, recognize that assumptions are assumptions. I remember talking with somebody one time and, about that, and how we would probably very easily make some kind of syllogism. I can't think of one now, but with the reason of the sun will rise tomorrow. Okay? And then people would accept that. Yes, the sun will rise tomorrow. Like tomorrow, a syllogism, look at the lawn. Tomorrow there will be light on it because the sun will rise tomorrow. And people will go, yes, that's perfect syllogism. That makes sense. But then, how do we know the sun will rise tomorrow? How do we know that the sun won't just explode overnight and, and scatter throughout the universe and it won't rise tomorrow? Well, we don't, so maybe that will happen to the sun. But then do you go through in your life and say, well, then I can't even use the sun will rise tomorrow as a reason for anything, even though it's risen for the last however many days? But on the other hand, it's true, we aren't really sure it will rise tomorrow. Okay, so I don't know. So you can make yourself crazy over this kind of stuff. It's almost as bad as buying international air tickets. Except you really get crazy over the international air tickets. Right? Okay, so, Anyway. Okay, so even so, one of the purposes of Buddhist reasoning and debate is to establish that the Buddha and the Buddhist scriptures are reliable, though the scriptures are sorted into definitive teachings and those requiring interpretation. So, you can't take, then there's also, everybody has their own way of defining definitive teachings and ones requiring interpretation. And, if you can't just rely on things that are, some schools say the sutras that you can take literally are definitive. And Prasangikas say, no, not really. Yeah, because in something like the Heart Sutra, you have, not inherently existent only in a few places, but not everywhere. And so you have to carry it over from where it is in one place in the sutra to the other places. So there's definitive sutras that you better not take literally. Yeah, but then how do you know, if you can't take them literally, what they really mean? Well, then you have to depend on the great pundits to explain it to you. But how do you know that they understood it properly? Because there's a whole bunch of really great pundits, and they explain things differently. Yeah? So I'll leave you with that. Yeah. Thus, along these lines, Buddhists give a division from the point of view of the name reliable cognizers into three: persons such as Buddhas, scriptures such as the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, and minds, direct perceivers and inferential cognizers. This is called a division from the point of view of the name, because it is not a true division of reliable cognizers. So often, let me finish reading this and then I'll go back. Rather, it is a division of things that are called by the term reliable cognizer. The Buddha is called a reliable cognizer or a reliable person because Buddhists find that they can rely upon his sayings as reliably established. Some scriptures are called reliable cognizers or reliable scriptures because they teach reliable and definitively the way things are. And some consciousnesses are called reliable cognizers too. However, from among the three, reliable persons, reliable scriptures, and reliable minds, only the minds are actual reliable cognizers. The others are merely called reliable cognizers. Okay, so this is something very important to learn, okay? That there's this thing called terminological divisions. That's what he called, what did he call it? Division from the point of view of the name, okay? So it takes something where they've called a whole group of things something, like in this case, the Buddha, the sutras on the Four Noble Truths, and the consciousness realizing emptiness. Those are all called reliable cognizers. They're given that name, but all of them are not reliable cognizers. Okay? So just because it's called a reliable cognizer, do not be foolish and think it really is one. Okay? Now, why do they call things reliable cognizers that aren't? Reliable cognizers. I think in this case, it's to point out, that the Buddhists and the scriptures, there's something very reliable about them that we can rely on, even though they're not actually reliable cognizers, because they're not consciousnesses. So you find this again and again. One of the things in Volume 4 that I was going crazy with is when you talk about what are the three jewels. So there's things that are called the Sangha jewel, but are not the Sangha jewel. Okay? And things that are called the Dharma jewel, that are not the Dharma jewel. Yeah. So this is, I'm wondering if we can think of an example in English where we do that, where we call something by a name that it really isn't.
Call the person you love baby.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Do you call the person you love baby or honey? Yeah. Okay. Sweetheart. Yeah. Okay, those are very good. Yeah, you call something, you give it a name because it has some relationship to the actual meaning of the name, but it really isn't that thing. Okay, so yeah, so I remember in the Prasangika, there's a thing about, let's see, the mind that that perceives the rabbit's horn is a reliable cognizer of rabbit's horn. It's a reliable cognizer of its, rabbit's horns or of one of the objects, but it's not a reliable cognizer. Okay, so it's the same kind of thing. Yeah, like even though its object is a non-existent, it's reliable in knowing this non-existent. Okay, but it's not a reliable cognizer. So this is the same kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, we call people baby. It's like, huh? Not in German. I wonder what do you call them in German? What? Yeah, you don't. But a noun? Yeah, Oh, that's why. Do they call them cabbage in French? Really? Yeah, my little cabbage. Tichu. And do you whack them for calling you a cabbage? Oh, is that it? Okay. Oh. Okay. Yeah, so. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. We often use the word meditation for a lot of things that aren't meditation. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Oh. Like, I have no idea. Okay, so now chapter 14, right? The three spheres of agent, action, and object. Okay, as mentioned in chapter 10, Basic Buddhist Ontology 2, training in Buddhist reasoning and debate serves in a similar way to training in special insight, known as vipassana in Pali, a set of meditation practices that have become popular in Europe and America. That's, again, just for the record, okay, every Buddhist tradition has vipassana meditation, so it's not just what some people who follow the Pali tradition say is vipassana. Okay? Yeah. Just as the practitioner of vipassana is trained to be mindful of the field of appearances, both internal and external, so the Buddhist debater is trained to be mindful of the field of appearances. Yeah. The intent of this chapter on the three spheres of agent, action, and object, as the last chapter in part 1, is to bring together some of the material covered in this part. As I have said before, the descriptions of phenomena and consciousnesses are of little value if you do not reflect on their meaning. Thus, the description of the three spheres is a way of encouraging you to be mindful of what appears externally and internally. With a subtle portion of the mind, pay attention to what you are perceiving and by what means you are perceiving. So this is really important, because we so often tend to learn this material just as learning definitions and divisions and knowing how to work the words. But, when asked to identify those kind of cognizers within ourselves, we're at a loss. Or we study mind and mental factors, and we know all the names of all the mental factors, but we can't attach them to anything that we're feeling. We don't have names for what we're feeling, but we'll talk about all these mental factors. Okay, so we have to remember that all of this is a helpful guide for us to look inside so that we can start identifying what they're talking about in our own experience. And in the process of identifying that, then we come to understand our own mind much better. Okay? And I know for me personally, one of the big things that was so helpful to me was understanding the difference between a conceptual consciousness and a non-conceptual consciousness. Yeah? Because so often we have conceptual consciousnesses that we think are non-conceptual consciousnesses. Yeah? We look at somebody and we say that person is a jerk. Yeah? And we think that's not a concept, that we're actually seeing a jerk. Yeah? And, it's just something that it's conceptual. Our mind has made it up. So many things like that. So I think, for me anyway, it was really helpful to start looking at my mind and what is conceptual, what do I really know through, direct perceivers. And then it's like, wow, most of what I think, most of how I live is conceptual stuff. That I think is objectively real out there, but it's not. Like when we say that person's mad at me, or that person criticized me, we feel like, we are seeing it with our eyes, we are hearing it with our ears, but we're not. It's this conceptual consciousness. Okay? So all this stuff that we're using, really kind of apply it to your life and see how it helps you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be an interesting thing if we helped each other with that. And when we thought somebody was stating something as if it were known by a direct perceiver, but it was a conceptual mind, to be able to say, is that a conceptual mind or a direct perceiver? And to be able to help somebody and say that without them getting mad at you? Yeah, what do you think? Do you think we could do that? Or should we really try and keep silence during retreats? Yeah. Maybe we should work on keeping silence first. Yeah. That might be a good idea. Yeah?
I have heard some people very skillfully ask, is that an interpretation?
Uh-huh.
So that's another way of getting at it. And it's very helpful to come back to, what did I actually observe?
Right. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Okay, so thus this description of the three spheres is a way of encouraging you to be mindful of what appears externally and internally. With a subtle portion of the mind, pay attention to what you are perceiving and what means you are perceiving. The advice given to Buddhist meditators is that in watching, you should be like a person who hears a thief in the night. You should get up quickly and quietly try to see who the thief is, rather than getting up and making a lot of noise, thereby scaring the thief off. I don't know. That way you stand a chance of observing the culprit. This means that you should not think so forcefully. For example, now I am watching my thoughts about such and so that no portion of the mind is left over. And then, this is not the advice given by modern American law enforcement. Modern day police advise us to stay in bed and pretend to be asleep for fear that a startled thief would harm us. Yeah. So what are the three spheres of agent, action, and object? He didn't want to get sued in case somebody followed his advice. It is fine to think of this in terms of grammar. The agent is that which is acting. The action is what the agent is doing, and the object is that upon which the agent is acting. For the event in which a person hits a ball, the person is the hitter, the agent. Hitting is the action, and the ball is the object that was hit. Here are some ways of sorting out these three: the agent, action, and object. Okay, so if we look at the chart, doer, doing, and that which is done, or that done, the deed. Okay, driver, driving, and tractor. Okay, cook, cooking, and cabbage. But then your honey is going to go, oh, you're cooking me. Experiencer, experiencing, and then pain and pleasure. Okay. Eye conscious, visual consciousness, seeing, and blue. Nose consciousness, olfactory consciousness, smelling, and smoke. Mental consciousness, perceiving, and then a mental object, like a dream. Okay. Inferential cognizer, inferring, and presence of fire. Yeah, if you're knowing that by inference. The presence of fire could also be under visual consciousness, seeing, and then the presence of fire. Okay, those people understand those? Okay. So it would be like meditator, meditating, and emptiness. Yeah, something like that. We did it that way. For a sense experience or a mental experience, it is the consciousness that is the agent of a perception, aware of and sometimes realizing an object. Of course, we commonly say such things as, I see a pot. And in a sense, that is true. Whereas Hindus, I love it. In a sense, it's true. This is common language. I see a pot. But actually, if you use debate language, what appears to the visual consciousness is not a pot. It's the color and shape of the pot. But I think shape should also be a tactile object. Don't you? Shouldn't it be a tactile object too? Whereas Hindus predominantly assert a permanent soul who is a silent observer of the fields of experience and consciousness, all Buddhists deny that such a soul exists. In the system of the Sutra school following reasoning, the person is merely imputed to the aggregates of body and consciousness, and therefore does not exist independently of those aggregates. In Prasangika, we always say the person is merely imputed independence on the aggregates, because they assert true existence. Yeah. Okay. Still, in a sense, the person does experience and perceive, but these activities are accomplished through the aggregates. So that's why they say that the Buddha is just terminologically called a reliable consciousness. You know, if you're talking about an Arya Buddha, because an Arya Buddha is a person. Okay. So sometimes if you use debate language, it doesn't go well with ordinary language. Okay. So in the case of a sense perception or a mental perception, it is the consciousness that performs the action of knowing. Recall that the definition of a consciousness is that which is clear and knowing, or clear and cognizant. The nature of consciousness is clear, and the function of consciousness is to know or cognize things. The range of objects of sense and mental, here it always says perceptions, but I think it should say perceivers, because if you're talking about a consciousness, it's a perceiver. To me, the word perception I don't get the feeling of the consciousness that's knowing when I hear perception. Yeah. I hear, for perception is, I don't feel like it's the consciousness. Like cognition, Cognition to me is not emphasizing that you're talking about the agent. Whereas if you say cognizer, that is. Okay. So I think, we need some, you notice in what I write, I always put cognizer or perceiver or something for that reason. Okay, recall the nature of consciousness is clear. The range of objects of sense and mental perceivers includes any phenomenon, permanent or impermanent, and non-existence may appear as well, though they would be objects only in a grammatical sense. Again, we say such things as I see a pot, but the eye is limited to its own domain of the color and shape of a pot, the visible form. Recall that the collected topics debaters draw a distinction between what the visual consciousness sees and an object apprehended by the visual consciousness. So the visual consciousness sees the pot, but the visual consciousness apprehends the color and shape of the pot. Okay. So what the visual consciousness sees is whatever we normally say we see, a pot, a flower, a person, and so on. An object apprehended by the visual consciousness must be only the visual forms that the visual consciousness has dominion over, the color and shape of a pot, the color and shape of a person's body, and so on. And then remember, we were talking some months ago about then what category of phenomena do you put the pot in? Do you? And so most people say, well, you put it in, the category of tangible objects. But it doesn't really fit there either, because tangible objects, it's, what is it, smooth and rough and hard and soft and hunger and thirst. And a pot isn't any of those. Yeah. But we throw it in the category of the object of a tactile perceiver. Yeah. So, okay. As you have learned, the primary division of consciousnesses is into two, the mental and sense consciousnesses. That's how he's divided them. In other texts, it's into primary minds and mental factors. And the sense consciousnesses are further divided into the five. The five subtle internal sense powers, or sense faculties, and the five sense consciousnesses. Yeah, visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile consciousnesses are always cited in this same order. Recall that some scholars say they are given in this order because that is the order of reliability, the visual consciousness being the least reliable and the body consciousness being the most reliable. Yeah? Do you think that? Do you trust your body consciousness more than your visual one? No. Yeah. Other scholars say that the forms and consciousnesses are listed in this order because it reflects the range of perception, visible objects being perceptible from great distances and tangible objects being perceptible only when in direct contact with the body. That makes more sense. Still others point out that the given order of the sense powers and consciousnesses merely reflects the physical placement of these senses within the body. Yeah, the eyes are higher up. Roughly, the eye is above the ear above the nose, and so forth. And the body consciousness is present throughout the body. The seat of the mental consciousness is mainly at the heart, so it is in order as well. But you talk about the seat of the mental consciousness is at the heart, but they mean the heart chakra, but the mental consciousness doesn't have form. So how can you say it somewhere? It's another one of my questions.
Not so clear how to separate the apprehending and seeing.
Okay, because when we talk about each of the senses has its own range of what it can perceive. So the visual consciousness just sees colors and shape. But in our language, so that's called it, the visual consciousness apprehends color and shape. Okay, but you see that I just said the visual consciousness sees color and shape. In ordinary language, it sounds okay, the visual consciousness sees color and shape. It also can sound okay to say the visual consciousness sees the table. But in debate language, you can't say the visual consciousness sees the table because the visual consciousness only perceives color and shape, and the table isn't a color and it isn't a shape. Okay? So that's the difference between seeing and apprehending. Is that clear to people? Yeah. Okay, so we look at the other chart. Okay, eye consciousness, visible objects. I think that chart is pretty obvious. Yeah, it reminds me in 4th grade, I think we learned this, except we didn't learn the one about the mental and the hidden phenomena. The best and most reliable sort of visual perceivers is direct perceivers, in which both the visual consciousness sees, and in which both what the visual consciousness sees and what it understands are exactly the same thing. Okay, so visual direct perceivers. And there's another chart. You have the perceiver, like the visual consciousness, the perception, the act of seeing, and the object perceived. What did he draw? Is that a ball? Is it a grapefruit? No, it's not a foot. Basketball. Soccer ball. Soccer balls have stripes around the middle. So the eye consciousness in combination with its uncommon empowering condition, an eye sense faculty or sense power, a physical object that is not a perceiver. Okay, so the sense faculty or sense power is a physical object, but it's a subtle one. Yeah. And so seeing directly and accurately is the action, and then the object, the visual objects, the colors and shapes of visual objects, balls, and so forth. Well, no, the balls aren't, the balls they would probably put as a tangible object. Yeah. Because in debate language they would. In our language we would say, you see the ball. Yeah.
Seems like from the previous page, the distinction he made between apprehend and see, that it should say apprehends. And in the same thing in the paragraph just up above, the eye consciousness apprehends and what it understands are exactly the same thing. He's mixing.
What? In which both what the eye consciousness sees and what it understands. Yeah, there he's going back to regular English. Yeah. He's not using debate again.
But
debate
also the
language.
Point you made too, which is that you don't apprehend a ball, you apprehend shape and color.
Yeah, exactly.
The tactile consciousness.
Yeah. Okay. However, as we all have observed, visual perception is not always accurate and reliable. Sometimes the eye simply does not ascertain a visible object. The object appears, but it is not noticed. Imagine a moment when you are walking along a path, deeply involved in a conversation with a friend walking with you, and someone you know passes going the other way. Though that person tries to catch your eye, you are too engrossed to see. Visible objects, such as the color of that friend's clothes, did appear, but you just did not notice. In such an event, the visual consciousness is unclear. Okay. Now, when I think about this thing, okay, you know, the difference between ascertained, appearing but not ascertained, okay, in his example, let's use sound, okay? So you're talking to somebody here, and you hear somebody else talking in another room, okay? But you can't hear what the words are exactly that they're saying. So it seems to me that you still have a direct perceiver, a reliable direct perceiver of there being sound, but you don't have a reliable direct perceiver regarding the words that were said. Yeah. So it's interesting because it's one cognizer. Yeah, it's an ear, an auditory consciousness that is a direct perceiver towards one object, but an inattentive perceiver towards another object. But it's the same perception. Yeah. So just to point that out. Okay. I have a lot of those. I know somebody's talking, but what are they saying? Yeah, or you see something from a distance, that there's a form out there, but you don't know exactly what it is. Yeah.
Would that not be the obstacle of the sense power through which the clarity of the ear consciousness is blocked? Would that be different? Wouldn't that be different than when your attention is diverged from an object, and that's why you don't hear or see clearly that which appears to properly working sense power?
Okay. That's interesting. Like if you just don't understand the words because your attention is elsewhere, versus if you just don't understand the words because the person isn't speaking loud enough. Yeah. But, would they both be considered inattentive? Because the sound is appearing, but the words are appearing to your ear consciousness. but you just can't ascertain what they're saying. It's interesting because the example they usually give for inattentive is that your attention is diverted elsewhere. But I wonder about the example I gave, where your attention isn't diverted elsewhere, but still it's appearing but not being ascertained.
There's a long discussion in the back of Mind in Tibetan Buddhism about this, and there's like 3 different positions. And one of the things that was I never heard about before that came up in that is because you're in Satantrika following reasoning, there's this thing about the final nature of the object. Because I think in that school, the object is what it is, right? It really is what it really is.
Yeah,
so
it's truly
then there's the example they give is there's fire in a distance, but it's so far away that all you see is the color. And so then there's John Sheikh and all these other people. They have 3 different opinions about what's really happening there, because you haven't really ascertained that it's fire, so you don't know the final nature of it. So then they have all these different positions about it.
Yeah, but you do know it's yellow,
right?
And isn't that knowing the final nature of the color?
Well, that's how I thought when I was reading it.
Yeah,
but they never said it that way.
Yeah.
It was like because of the object. That's what I was thinking, but they were always saying, but the final nature of the object, so there were different positions on that.
Yeah. Probably, something you can debate about. Yeah. So then you're left with saying, well, if you just see the yellow of the fire, is that not a valid perceiver?
One said it was, and I think the word they used is just of the mere appearance, which to me meant you just know it's a color.
But then, you can get really detailed about that. Because let's say somebody's jeans appear to you. Okay, so there's blue, there's jeans, and there's Calvin Klein's jeans. Yeah, so which one is the final nature? When you do it that way, do you have to know that they're Calvin Klein jeans for it to be, ascertained properly, or is just knowing their jeans good enough?
That came up in the debate too, and you know what it was around? It was around a tree and a shoka tree. So all you knew was a tree generality when you knew the tree. But what you knew, it was an Soka tree.
But then there's different kinds of trees too. I mean, like if you say there's a pine tree, there's so many different kinds of pine trees. So at what point do you actually, and then what about cultures that have more words to discern things? Like with snow, when we would say that's snow, but an Eskimo would have a whole other vocabulary for all the different kinds of snow. So are we not seeing snow because we're not able to tell the actual kind of snow it is? Yeah. So, things to think. I mean, I think what's useful in asking these questions is that we come to see how things are merely designated and how things are dependent. And that if we get ourselves locked into, but they've got to be this and they can't be that, then it can be difficult. Sometimes the visual consciousness is outright mistaken. The stock examples of this are seeing white snow as blue, but I think that the snow is actually blue, from what I read of the science, or seeing a single moon as 2 moons. In these cases, the visual consciousness takes a clear appearance of a non-existent as its object. Such a consciousness is mistaken. The next table shows the range of visual perceptions. Have you been watching how often you have wrong consciousnesses, even, sense wrong consciousnesses? Yeah. It's very interesting to to watch. Yeah, you go in to Chenrezig Hall and they're baking cookies. No, it's granola. Yeah, every time. Even though it's been granola every time. But every time you go in, you're sure they're making cookies. Okay. Or have you noticed, some of you, I can spot from a long distance away because of the way you walk or your height or something, or I know your jackets. But some people I can't tell them apart from far away. Are you like that? Yeah, especially in winter when everybody's all bundled up, you just see these, maroon kind of what effigies? Cabbages. Oh yeah, yeah, um, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. So are you having, do we have to be able to identify exactly who the person is? Petit chou, yeah. Yeah, so if you say mon petit chou, are you ascertaining the object or not? Yeah. Let's say you have several petite choux. Yeah, then you have very small feet, don't you? Oh. My mon petit chou. You have little paws that you. Okay. So the next table. Okay. The old goat. Mon petit chou. Yeah. Okay, so the old goat, the eye consciousness, in combination with its uncommon empowering condition, an eye sense power, a physical object that is not a perceiver. Okay, so that's your perceiver, the consciousness. Okay, the perception sees, for example, a direct perceiver, and then he has what's appearing is visible objects, color and shape. Okay, or does not perceive as a consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained or noticed. Okay, and that appearing is, now this is where, what are we going to posit in there? Because it's, if you just say blue, but what, it's the blue of the blue jeans, but you're not apprehending blue jeans. So, can you say you're, just leave it with I'm seeing blue? I don't know. It's so much easier when you don't ask questions. Isn't it? Yeah, they just see blue. But, when you see blue, aren't you seeing the blue of something? Yeah, so, shouldn't you be able to identify what that object is? Oh, it's blue jeans. It's Calvin Klein's. No, it's whatever Ivanka Trump's. It's whatever it is, okay. Yes, exactly. Well, somebody who purchases clothes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or somebody's blue jeans.
Yeah.
And then you turn around and run after it, and you see, oh, it was a blue robe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's an interesting question from what Venerable Pella asked, because would that be considered an inattentive one? It's appearing but not realized, ascertained, but our attention is looking at it. It isn't that our attention is distracted. So, yeah, lots of questions. Okay, so the eye perceiver, can see as an direct perceiver, or it does not perceive, so the object appears but isn't ascertained, or it misperceives as a wrong or mistaken consciousness, which is a clear appearance of a non-existent. Okay, so I'm just thinking about that one with the fire. Then do you say that, you haven't seen that it's fire because you haven't seen its final nature? Then do you say that the yellow is a non-existent? That you're seeing the yellow of the fire at a distance. Anyway. Okay. Yeah?
Mine in Tibetan Buddhism, they had another division of direct perceivers into direct perceivers induced by themselves and direct perceivers induced by another. Meaning, and they use that example of the fire, so that you see the yellow, so that's a direct perceiver of the yellow, and then based upon that, when you get closer, you have a direct perceiver induced by another that then knows it's the fire. So then both of them are perceived, according to someone, I can't remember who, are direct perceivers. But
yeah, but they're occurring at different times.
Yeah.
So that person would say they're both reliable consciousnesses, but another person would say, no, they're not. Yeah. Okay, so then he has a footnote. So there is a little problem here in that the third sphere should not be that appearing, but should be that perceived, in order to fit with the other two spheres of the perceiver and the perception, or perceiving, I think it should be. However, often things appear to us, but we do not perceive them, as in the second case above. Perceive should indicate clarity, active ascertainment, actively noticing an appearing object. Yeah, but he put it as what's that appearing. Clearly, the mental consciousness is the most complex. As described by the Buddhists, the mental consciousness is capable not only of thought, but also direct perception. In fact, other than when it precedes by thoughts, the mental consciousness is always a direct perceiver. Well, but for us, I think it's mostly thoughts. As with the sense direct perceiver, mental direct perceivers are also unmistaken and correct. So here, a mental direct perceiver could be when you are aware that you're perceiving your happiness. You're aware that you're happy. You're aware that something is painful. So knowing, or you're aware of, your emotions. Those can be also described as mental direct perceivers. A thought consciousness always operates indirectly by way of the appearance of a generalized mental image, or a conceptual appearance that may represent anything. The third column in the next table is that appearing, and the fourth is that perceived. This could have been done with the sense consciousnesses too. However, it is only for the thought consciousness that there can be a difference between what appears and what is perceived. Okay. So is that true? That sense consciousnesses, there's no difference between what appears and what is perceived? What would be an example?
Conceptual wrong consciousness. Seeing two moons and when there's one.
Okay, but what appears is one moon. What's perceived as two moons. A what? A mirage. Yeah. What's appearing as a mirage, what's perceived as water.
How about having an illness where you see things as yellow because of the illness? There's a name for this.
Yeah, again, what's appearing would be the actual color it is, and what's perceived as yellow. Yeah.
I thought that non-conceptual wrong consciousnesses were mistaken with regard to their appearing object as well as erroneous.
Yeah, I've heard it both ways. Yeah, that what appears is one moon. Yeah, what's apprehended is two, or what's perceived as two. And I've always also heard that what appears, is two moons, and it's mistaken. Yeah. But then it's the thing you often hear, because to be an object, it has to be an existent. So for some people, they say you can't say that two moons appears because that the two moons are the appearing object, because two moons don't exist.
But they say inherent existence appears to our sense consciousness.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a consequence point of view.
Yeah. But let's stick with Satantrika just for right now. But that is, we got to stick with Satantrika for right now with that. Because the whole definition of appearance for Prasangika is totally different. Yeah. But, so some people would say I've heard it, two moons appear. Yeah, so it's a wrong consciousness with respect to its appearing object and its apprehended object. And some people say its appearing object is one moon, and it's a mistake, it's an erroneous consciousness with respect to its appearing object. Because one moon appears, but you're seeing two moons. No, that doesn't make sense. Saying they would still say it's wrong regarding, I don't know, I'm getting confused. Do you have something in there? I bet I've heard it both ways.
Mine in Tibetan Buddhism is mixed on this, and that's why I was going to say it's so confusing, because at one point they'll say the appearing object is one moon, and the apprehended or engaged object is two. And then they'll say at another point in the book, they'll say in all these non-conceptual wrong consciousness, it's defined as wrong in terms of its engaged object, but they'll say it's wrong also with the appearing object.
Yeah.
So right now, they're contradicting themselves. And then at one point in the book, Ladi Rinpoche says, well, if you're in a debate, it's kind of like, how did you say that? It was something like, you can ask the person what's the engaged object or what's the appearing object, and you can answer this, but of course it doesn't exist. So it's kind of like they're using it like a term. It's like back to we're using this terminologically, but it doesn't exist because because it's a non-existent.
Yeah.
So it's really mixed up. It's not consistent even in that book.
Right. Yeah. And so, so that's why I say, but it comes out to that the appearing object, it's mistaken or it's erroneous with respect to the appearing object. There's something wrong. The apprehended, but also if you're seeing two moons, that there's something wrong with the appearing object. Wait a minute. No, but some people will say when you're seeing two moons, some people will say the appearing object is one moon, and some people will say the appearing object is two moons. Yeah, that it's a non-existent that is clearly appearing. And other people would say, no, it's one moon. Yeah.
We've been chewing over this particular one for years. I
Mhm.
wonder if we could schedule a session with Geshe Dadul.
But no, I think the thing is there isn't one answer, because, I mean, this is not a new topic. You know, they've been debating this for a long time. But this is what you have very often, is the different yikcha have different positions on this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, put it on his list. You can ask about it. But I mean, think about it first before you ask him. You know, what is appearing? Well, in one way you could say, what's appearing? One moon is appearing. In another way, what's appearing? Two moons are appearing. Okay? So either one makes sense. Yeah? So if one you call, you know, it's you would say it's mistaken, erroneous with its appearing object, because one moon is appearing, but you're seeing two moons. And other people would say, no, it's the appearance of a non-existent. Yeah. So it's just they have different ways of, you know, different people, different yikcha. Mm-hmm.
Is perceived synonymous with apprehend here in these examples?
You would use perceived as synonymous with apprehend if you were talking about direct perceivers. Yeah. But I don't use the word, in any way, I don't use the word perceive when I'm talking about conceptual consciousnesses. Yeah, I don't know about other people, but I try and differentiate those. Okay, so let's look at the chart. So, perceiver, mental consciousness, perception, direct, non-representational. So what's appearing? An actual object. Okay, and what's perceived? Perhaps any impermanent phenomena. Or perhaps any phenomena permanent or impermanent. That depends. That's going to depend upon the school that you're talking about there. He has numbers. Does it say on the numbers? Yeah, what does it say? 'Cause I don't. Oh no, for the first one it says, it is the association of the Theravada schools of philosophy which provide the point of view for basic Buddhist logic and epistemology. That's not totally accurate. That the mental direct perceiver can perceive explicitly only impermanent objects. That's the subtantric view. It is the assertion of the Mahayana, or great vehicle schools of philosophy, that the mental direct perceiver is able to perceive any existent, whether impermanent or permanent. So we talked about that before. So he's just bringing in the position of another school here. Okay, otherwise, the mental consciousness can have an indirect or a conceptual, always representational perception. What's appearing is a conceptual appearance, which is a permanent phenomena, and or a sound generality, a permanent phenomena representing a sound or term for which the referent is not known to the hearer. Although I've heard different definitions for sound generality too. I've seen different definitions. Okay, anyway, for the first one, if you have a conceptual appearance appearing, then what is perceived is anything existent or non-existent. Meaning that if you're having a conceptual consciousness, the objects that's being perceived can be existent or non-existent because you're perceiving it all through a conceptual appearance. Yeah. Or with a sound generality, what you're perceiving is sound as perceived by the mind. Because that's one question I've had, is the sound generality, like when when you're thinking and you're saying words to yourself, yeah, is that what is a sound generality? Or as he described it here, the sound generality is you get a description of something and that's the sound generality. So I'm not very clear on what a sound generality is. Yeah, but it's the sound generality. Now, I've heard it defined in different ways. One being just the term, the other being, you're getting some vague idea of what that means through hearing the term. Something like that. I have it in some notes somewhere. I can look it up at some point. Different ways I've heard sound generality. But you're saying it's just the term. So the
terms, like tonight we learned, what was the term we used for cabbage in French?
Mon petit chou. Chou, like chou.
Okay, so that's a term that we learned tonight.
Okay, so
that was a sound generality.
The sound generality is the sound chou,
yes.
Or the sound generality is in your mind when you think chou. Because here it's sound as perceived by the mind.
Yeah.
So how does the mind perceive sound? According to this school, it's only after you have a series of direct perception with your ear consciousness, then there's a brief moment of a mental direct perception of sound, but it's not ascertained. So what is the sound generality then?
I'm just going to guess then. I would guess that it's a conceptual consciousness that then is like you're learning a language, you're learning all these terms, and you're just reviewing these terms, and you don't yet actually know what they refer to.
Yeah, but
like most of this book.
Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah. So what is it? When we say term, what is a term? Actually, a term under the three kinds of impermanent phenomena, it's an abstract composite.
The meaning, the sound generality is just a meaning generality induced by sound that is heard.
Yeah, that's the way I've heard it explained sometimes too, where it sounds like it's actually a meaning generality induced by the sound, either the term or the description. But then, I've heard it other ways too. Quite confused. Oh, who defines it where? Oh, okay.
He says a sound generality, which might also be called a term generality, is a generalized conceptual image that you get based on the sound of the name.
Mm-hmm.
Page turn fast enough, or a description
Mm-hmm.
of a thing without actually knowing the real meaning of the thing. Like an impression of a person you get from just hearing the name or some comments about that person.
Mm-hmm.
A conceptual appearance is a generalized conceptual image of something that you have previously met with.
So, what?
The cow has a meaning generality of hay, but they don't have the term for hay, so they have the meaning generality only.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They have the sound generality. They hear the truck of the farmer coming, and then there is a sound generality that makes them go to the entrance to get food. That's a sound generality based on. It's a concept in their minds based on the sound they've heard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, person next to you.
I was just gonna say the turkeys. Like when I come out and like shake the bag of the pita bread, they come running, and I don't have to.
Yeah, but no, wouldn't that be an inference?
I've never asked the turkeys.
Yeah, huh? Is that an inference? You know, this sound, and they infer. You know, means I'm going to get fed, or maybe it's a correct assumption because maybe you're not necessarily going to feed them. Yeah. Yeah, but they have some thought process there going on. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, sound generalities are a little bit confusing. Yeah, at least to me. Okay. Yeah, because the way the way you read it is, if you know what the object is, and you hear a description of it, that's a meaning generality. If you don't know what the object is and you hear a description of it, that's a sound generality. But then, dividing between the two, you know, it can be difficult. Yeah.
If someone says the word ocean to you, I've got the mic. If someone says the word ocean to you without your knowing its meaning, the image generated at that time is a sound generality.
So that's just, but what's the image generated? Is it just in your mind,
He says
saying the word ocean to yourself?
A mere reverberation of the sound ocean.
Okay, so that's quite different than what she just read, which is if you hear a description of it, the image you get from hearing the description.
Yeah, and that's confusing. And I think months ago we were talking about this too.
Yeah.
Old Lorik notes, those are listed as the two different interpretations.
They're what?
In your old Lorik notes that you are conceptually thinking about, those are the two interpretations of a sound generality. These two.
Yeah, see, I said I've heard it both ways. You guys didn't believe me. She knows. She typed up my old notes. Okay, so again, sound generality, that term, we're having different meanings from it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, then, we'll just, should we do his exercise? Read it very quickly. Be reflective about appearances, internal and external, in the way that I described at the end of chapter 10. Put mental labels on appearances as they pass. Just pay attention. Then, to the extent that you can, notice the noticer. Ask yourself, by what sort of consciousness am I noticing this object? Is this consciousness reliable? If not, can I improve on it? How or why not? Okay, then his reflection here, which will be the culmination of the evening. Okay. Okay. So it's a what? Years after I had been exposed to this material and had reflected on it some, I had a very strange insight, a moment of epiphany one day. I was watching a rerun of Bewitched, and I thought to myself, Samantha, how do you say, she a fine boy? What's that? She a fine boy. I don't know. That's a sound generality. I don't understand. And then I realized what a strange thought that was. I mean, exactly what was I lusting after? The images captured in the episode had to have been shot between about 1963 and 1972. It might have even been by that time I was watching that episode. That later on, he was watching that episode. She had already passed away. Even if she were still alive at that time, that particular fine form I was viewing would no longer have been, as we all change moment by moment. And what was the evidence I was basing my desire on? I was seeing a fuzzy reproduction of color and shape of a part of her body and hearing the sounds of her voice, all this being reproduced by electronics. Yet these sounds and images were enough to prompt a desirous thought in me. I felt deceived, vulnerable, unaware, and confused. And that's exactly what the digital companies want us to feel, And that's what, advertising wants us to feel. It is not at all that Elizabeth Montgomery was not a great-looking woman. Surely she was. Do we have to read this in a debate book? Even so, it was... Guys, they always put sex in it somehow. Even so, it was a strange thought I had. Noticing such thoughts, it is not hard to imagine that we live unaware in a world of illusion. Okay? So that's a very good example because we're laughing at him, but we do it the same. You see something. I mean, isn't that what advertising's about? You see color and shape conveyed by electronics. You put it together as an object. You develop attachment. You mull over your attachment till it becomes covetousness. Then you go out and you go and buy it. And that's being a patriotic citizen.